guys, HardlyBriefDan here with another episode of the Unity Make an RPG series. Today we're going to continue working on the inventory system where we left off before I had to move. So I finally got a new place, I got moved in, I got most of my furniture and stuff set up, so I'm able to actually record now. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and do a very quick review where we left off, and then we'll jump right in and get our inventory looking a little bit better. So basically, what we've done so far in this new little tutorial series was, or the revamp of Make an RPG, was we created a base player, we created a base item, and we created a new way to handle our stats using a base stat. So what we're going to be doing now, or in the last video, excuse me, what we left off doing was we created this inventory window. And basically it is, I'll go ahead and press play, we have a panel here with a little X button that closes the window, and it has a little backpack, show that's inventory, it tells us what it is, and we have this icon here that is basically just a image. Right now it's called our inventory slot, right? We have a slot, which is just the background, and then we have the item icon, which itself is just the item on top of that slot. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go ahead and add a component to our item slot, and that item slot component is going to be a UI component, and it's going to be a toggle button. So now when I go ahead and press play, we should be able to highlight. You can see that in the inspector here it says it's on, meaning it's selected, and you can turn it off and on. And what we want to do now is all of our buttons, or all of our item slots, are going to be toggleable. So that means you can see which one you're on, and that way when someone selects it, they can maybe you can display some stats, whatever the item is, or whatever you want to do, but it allows that person to select it. And the one other thing we're going to do is go ahead and add a toggle group, which is another Unity UI specific thing. It allows you to have all the toggles in one group, so only one is selected at a time, and it also has an option that allows you to turn them all off, I believe. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create an empty game object, and actually I think we're going to go ahead and do this way. We're going to go ahead and create an empty game object. I'm going to go ahead and reset it back to 000. I'm going to go ahead and rename it to our item slot toggle group. I'm going to go ahead and add a UI component of toggle group, and you can see allow switch off. This just means we're going to go ahead and toggle that. That means that all of the toggles can be off at one time. That means nothing selected, and that's what we want by default. So what we'll do now is in our item slot prefab, we're going to go ahead and drag and drop this item slot toggle group to where it says toggle group in our toggle component. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the toggle group under our inventory window, and then I'm going to go ahead and drag our item slot prefab on top of our old prefab so that it saves everything. So now we have this prefab. It has a sword on it because it's the one item we had. For now, we're not actually displaying the correct icon yet. But what we want to do now is go ahead and set up a script that allows us to create the actual toggles. So what we'll do now is I'm going to leave this toggle button here, this prefab for now, and we are going to go ahead and create a C# script. So we're going to jump into our scripts folder here, and we're going to highlight inventory, and we're going to create a C# script, and we're going to call this inventory. I will call it inventory window, and I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this to our inventory window UI component, the actual window in the canvas. So you can see that it's attached now. I'm going to go ahead and open this up into Visual Studio, click reload, and if you remember, we're using Visual Studio for this, and I made a video on how to get that up and running for yourself. The other thing here is the other two scripts we wrote. I'm not going to go over them because we've already talked about them. But what we'll do now is go ahead and write the script. So we're going to need some public variables and some private variables, and so we'll go ahead and do the public ones first. So we're going to need a public int, and this int is going to be the starting position of our X coordinate and our starting position of our Y coordinate, so of the slot. So we're going to say, we'll go ahead and call this starting position X, and then we'll do a public int starting position Y. I'm going to go ahead and Control S to save, jump back right into Unity, and I'm going to go ahead and explain what I'm talking about. So you can go ahead and see now in our inventory window component, you can see that our inventory window script component has these two slots, so we can go ahead and adjust the numbers that we want. But actually in our scene mode here, you see that we have this button, and it's our prefab. And you can see over here in the inspector under rect transform that it's position X and position Y. It's on here it's -117 and 77. You can go ahead and drag it around. You can see that it's changing, and those are the starting positions. This is where we want each slot to start, or this is where we want our for loop that we're going to create to start its position. So what we'll do is go ahead and start here, add one, add one, add one, add one, all the way up to a certain amount and a certain length, and that's going to be up to you depending on the size of your window. So what I'll do now is I'm going to go ahead and use one set -117 and 77. So on our inventory window here, I'm going to go ahead and set that. So we'll do -117 and positive 77 for the Y. Go ahead and Control S to save. Jump back into Visual Studio, and we're going to go ahead and add a couple more public variables. So we're going to go ahead and add a public int. This is going to be total. Go ahead and add int. It's going to be total slot count per page. So we'll just say slot count per page, and public int slot count per for slot count. We'll call it length. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about these. So I'm going to Control S to save again, jump right back into Unity, and we'll go ahead and talk about these. So depending on the size of your window and depending on how you want your inventory like this set up, you can determine how many you want per page. Or maybe you only want one page, so you only can limit the number of slots. Maybe your bag type determines the number of slots available. So basically, the slots per page is a variable that we're going to use for this tutorial, but definitely for your project, kind of go ahead and think about how you want your inventory to work and then just adapt these ideas. But for now, I want 25 slots total. So we're going to have 5 length and 5 down, so 25. So I'm going to go ahead and write 25. And then, like I said, for length, which is just going over, we're going to go ahead and have 5. That means we're going to have 5 icons, slots in a row, and we'll have 5 down. So that's 25 total, 5 times 5. Go ahead and Control S to save. Jump right back into Visual Studio, and we're going to go ahead and create the last bit of public variables. So the last thing we want, or last two things we want, is a public toggle group and a public game object. So we'll do the game object one first, and this is going to be our item slot prefab, which is what we've created. We're going to use an UI element, so we need to go ahead and do, add a library up here. So we're going to go using Unity Engine, and we're going to do .ui. This allows us to use the UI specific components. So we'll do public toggle group, and we're going to go ahead and label this item slot toggle group. Goodness. Okay. All right. So now we have a toggle group, we have a game object, and those are all going to be public. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is I'll jump into Unity and explain those two things real quick, and then we'll go ahead and write the actual function or method that's going to go ahead and control the creation of our slots. So what we do with the item slot prefab, well, you just go down here in our prefabs folder, and you're going to drag and drop the item slot. For the toggle group, we're going to go ahead and drag and drop the toggle group object that we created, the game object that we created today. So there we go. We got our item slot, and we got our item slot toggle group. The item slot is the prefab that we're going to be instantiating here in our scene. So jump back into Visual Studio. We're going to go ahead and create a private method down here. It's going to return nothing, so it's going to return void. And we're going to go ahead and say create inventory. We'll say create inventory slots. Create inventory slots in window, we'll say. How about that? Sounds a bit better to me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have these two private variables that are going to be our X and Y position, and this is just going to allow us to keep track of what they are. So we're going to go ahead and create private variables. So we'll say private int, and this is going to be our X position, and we'll do a private int, and this will be our Y position. Excuse that alarm going off. So now we have these two positions. The alarm should go off in just a second. But anyways, we have these two positions here, and what we want to do, the very first thing is go ahead and start set these to our starting positions. So down here in our method here, we're going to go ahead and say x position is going to be equal to our starting x, or starting position x, and we're going to go ahead and do y position is going to be equal to our starting position y. Pretty simple. Now we're going to go ahead and create a for loop, and this for loop is what's going to iterate the number of times per page. So we're going to go ahead and do int I is equal to 0, and we're going to go ahead and put a space here, and we'll go I is less than our total, or excuse me, our slot, slot count length per page, slot count per page. So this is going to iterate through the for loop 25 times, because I said I wanted 25 slots per page. And we'll do I++. And here we're going to go ahead and write, this is where we're going to write the object. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to instantiate the item prefab. So the way we do this is by creating a private variable, another one. It's going to be a private type game object, and we're going to go ahead and call this our item slot. So when we instantiate the item slot prefab, we're going to go ahead and store it in our item slot so that we can manipulate it. So we're going to go ahead and say item slot is going to be equal to a game object, and we're going to go ahead and say instantiate, and this is going to be our item slot prefab. So here's all we're doing is we're calling the function instantiate. This means that we're creating this item, right? And the item that we want to create is our item slot prefab, which we created before, and we're just going to go ahead and cast it as a game object so that we know that what we're creating is actually a game object. And we're going to store it in the variable called item slot. Now the next thing that we want to do is we're going to go ahead and say item slot, and we're going to say dot name, and this is where you guys can add what you want, and this is kind of where you need to think about how you want to do your slot, your inventory logic. You could go ahead and rename this item slot name. Let me discuss this real quick. This is going to rename when the item is created in the inspector. So I'm going to go ahead and into Unity. When this prefab is created in the inspector, instead of it being called item slot, it's just going to say empty. Or maybe you want it to increment, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 25. Or maybe you want to start to 0 so that you can refer back to a certain, you can point to a certain spot in a inventory, like a list or something. It's all up to you and how you want to do it. We're going to go ahead and use empty for now. So I'm going to say item slot.name is equal to empty. Then we're going to go ahead and do item slot is equal, or excuse me, get component, and we're going to go ahead and get our toggle component off our item, right? And what we want to do is, since we have that component, we want to get the group of that component, and I'm going to go ahead and show, or the variable group. So you do dot group, and I'll go ahead and show you that in Unity. So on our item slot here in our toggle component, you see there is a group variable, and we gave it our slot group, but what we want to do is make sure that when we instantiate the slot that it's in that group. So we're going to go ahead and assign it just in case. So we're going to do toggle group, or excuse me, dot group is going to be equal to our inventory slot, our toggle group, item slot toggle group variable, and we're going to say, hey, get the component of toggle group. Right? So what we're doing is we're saying, look at this game object called item slot toggle group, get the component toggle group, and assign it. Actually, we don't even need to do that, because we can just say get the item slot toggle group, because we're not grabbing the entire game object. We're just grabbing the toggle group off that game object. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is tell the Unity where this position of this object is going to be. So what we'll do is say item slot dot actually, excuse me, let me go back a little bit. We actually need to go ahead and set the transform, the parent for this item slot. So basically what we want it to do is, and since it's in a window, we want all these item slots not to be randomly placed. We want them to be in our actual window. So what we'll do is say item slot dot transform, I think it is, transform dot set parent. And what we want to do is go ahead and capture the game object. Now, since this script is attached to our window, all we have to do is say this dot game object dot transform. So we're telling Unity that our parent the parent for this new item slot that we just instantiated, we just created, we're going to tell its parent is going to be this transform, this game object that this script is attached to, which is our window. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set the position. And the way we're going to do that is go and say item slot dot get component. We're going to go ahead and get its rect transform. And we're going to say local position. So this is its position relative to the parent. And we're going to say equal to new vector 3. And we're going to put our x position and our y position and 0. Because we're not messing with the z-axis. So now we want to basically we need to go ahead and we need to reset our next y position or our next x position so it iterates down, and then we need to go ahead and check to see when we've reached our row length to drop down to the next spot. So what we'll do now is we're going to say our new x position, once we create the first one, is going to be equal to, or excuse me, we're going to add to it. So we'll say plus equals int, so we're going to cast it, and we'll say item slot dot get component. We're going to get the same rect transform, and we're going to get its rect, and then we're going to get its width. So basically what we're saying is, hey, our item slot prefab has a component called rect transform, and it has a certain width to it, and we want that number, and that's usually a float. So we're going to cast it to an int and say, hey, the next one we place is going to be right next to it, right? So we just keep adding on to it. Now we need to go ahead and create a variable that's going to count how many slots we have, right? So we're going to say private int, and you could use the integer I that we created here, but we're going to go ahead and create a separate one just because to make it more obvious. So we'll say item count. Let's say actually item slot count. That's more obvious. And I'm going to go ahead and double click that and hit Control C to copy it. And we're going to come down here and we're going to create an if statement, and we're going to say if our item slot count modello. So I'll go ahead and describe that in just a second. So we're doing say item slot count. The percent sign is divided by our percent sign total, or what is it? What was the variable we created? It's our slot count length. And we're going to say is that equal to 0. So basically what this is doing is a form, you could say it's a form of division, but it's just looking for the remainder. So we're saying, hey, if our slot count length has a remainder 0 after we divide into slot count, if that remainder is 0, that means we've reached 5. That means we've reached our total slot count and our length, and therefore we want to go ahead and move our y position. So what we'll do now is we're going to go ahead and set our y position to be, we're going down, right? So in Unity, if you look up here, we're at 77, we're going to be moving down. So what we want to do is move down the proper amount, which is going to be the, not the width, but the height of that rect. So what we'll do, or width, because it's the same, we've made it a square, so it really doesn't matter in this case. But if you have an odd, remember, if you have a non-square icon, you're going to have to adjust. So instead of width, it'd be height. But anyways, we're going to do the same thing we did up here, this item slot. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it. And then the next thing we need to do is go ahead and set our X position. So our X position, and we're going to reset that back to our starting position. Because what this does is we're saying, hey, look, we've gone 5, so we need to go ahead and drop down our Y, and then we need to move back to the beginning, which is our starting X position. Now there's one other thing we need to do, and every time we iterate through this, we need to go ahead and say item count plus equals 1, or you can say plus plus, right? And then we need it, so this means we know it's going to hit 1, right? We know it's going to hit 5, excuse me, and then when it does, we want to go ahead and reset it. So we're going to say item count, or item slot count is going to be equal to 0. Now this script hopefully should run perfectly fine, and we should have a 25 item slots if I've coded correctly. So we'll go ahead and delete this prefab out of the scene because we don't need it. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that our inventory system's attached. We have all of our variables plugged in, and we'll go ahead and press play. And it didn't work, and that's because I forgot to put it in the start function. So we're going to go ahead and copy this create inventory slot in window. We're going to go up to the start method, and I didn't actually copy it. So we're going to say create item inventory slots in window. And we'll call that function at the start of the script, so when we hit play, it should do it. And there we go. So you can see that we've created these windows, these buttons, and the toggle group is correct. Let's go to the first one and see. You can tell it's on. We don't have a highlighter, so you can't really tell it's on, but so I'll go ahead and let's go to the second one. You see this empty slot? See, it's renamed them all, by the way. But basically, what we've done is we create an empty slot, and you can see it says it's on, it's off. So when I go ahead and click the second one, you know it's on. And that means it's selected. So now we can jump down to the third one and see if we can click it. And we can, but the second one is off. And that's because it's all in the same toggle group. And we can actually go to this third one and turn it off, and they're all off. So now what we're going to do in the next video is start coming up with a way to logically look in our player inventory and fill in these item slots with the proper icon. And that'll be in the next couple videos. So I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the delay in videos. Again, I was moving to a different state, and I'm back now. So hopefully I have a couple videos out for you over the weekend and all through next week. So have a good day, and I'll talk to you guys next time.